Greetings, I'm Cam Miller, and this is Team 64, a deep dive into the 1964 Cincinnati Reds, who were involved with one of the most thrilling pennant races in baseball history. Now, that organ music that you heard at the beginning of this episode was me messing around with a software emulator of a Hammond organ, but not just any Hammond organ. I specifically set it up to sound like the Crosley Field organ, played by the legendary Ronnie Dale at Crosley Field in the 50s and 60s. We're going to talk about Ronnie Dale and the Crosley organ, and of course, Crosley Field, as one should when they do a podcast on the 1964 Cincinnati Reds. But let's get into it. This is episode 1, Against All Odds. It was 60 years ago, and the Cincinnati Reds were coming off of a 5th place finish, marred by injuries and subpar performances. Bob Perkey had won 23 games in 1962, but only 6 in 1963 because of a shoulder injury that kind of limited him, and he got it in spring training, so he was really not the same pitcher throughout the year. Frank Robinson hit 21 home runs, but he only batted .259, which was 50 points less than his lifetime average, so he struggled during the year. I mean, it's hard to say somebody struggled when they hit 21 home runs, but expectations were high for Frank. But there were some bright spots, and Pete Rose was Rookie of the Year. Jim Maloney set a club record with 8 straight strikeouts in a game, and he also won 23 games. Vada Pinson continued his incredible rise through the National League and led the team with 22 home runs. He had 106 RBIs, and he hit .313. So going into 1964, the Giants and the Dodgers were really expected to battle it out for the pennant, and there were quote-unquote experts that said if everything goes right, the Reds might be in the mix. Well, the Reds would be in the mix. This club would fight and claw and find a way to be in the thick of it to the very end, even with a black cloud of uncertainty in the health of their beloved manager hanging over them during the entire season. It was Christmas time 1963, and 44-year-old Reds manager Fred Hutchinson, or Hutch, as he was called, noticed his neck was swollen and sore. So he went to get it looked at, and initially they thought, well, it could be a gland issue. And they said if the swelling didn't subside, well, come back, we'll do some more tests. Well, the swelling didn't subside, it got worse. And he was tested, resulting in a possible malignancy. So Hutch and his wife flew from their Florida home to Fred's hometown of Seattle, where his brother William was a surgeon, and he would be involved in the diagnosis and treatment. So on January 3rd, 1964, the Reds made the public announcement that Hutch would remain in Seattle for 2 months for treatments for an illness, and they hoped he'd be ready for spring training. Now, the treatments consisted of placing Fred in a pressurized oxygen chamber and administering x-rays. Said Hutch at the time, "I don't know much about all this treatment, something about radiology." Hutch was a tough-as-nails kind of guy, and he came over to the Cincinnati Reds in July of 1959, and he was tasked with turning around a ball club that was languishing in 7th place. Hutch went 39-35 the rest of that season, but they took a step backwards in 1960 when they finished 67-87 and in last place. But Reds brass knew that Hutch was the guy for the job, and they were right, because in 1961, his second full season as skipper of the Redlegs, he surprised everyone by winning the pennant, winning 93 games, and, of course, meeting the Yankees in the World Series. The following season, the Reds won 98 games, but remarkably, they finished in 3rd place, behind the Giants, who won 103 games, and then the Dodgers, who won 102. But although 1963 wasn't the season the Reds had hoped for, there were some expectations going into 64. Could this be the year? As the winter progressed, so too did Hutch. On January 20th, he sent a telegram to the club, and it was read to all the players and officials that were at the Netherland Hotel to watch the 1963 World Series film. And the message in part said, "Thanks for your messages and prayers. I think we've got it this time. We are optimistic. See you all in spring training." And as promised, he was there on March 1st as the Reds opened spring training at Al Lopez Field in Tampa. So when Hutch arrived at spring training, he wasn't about having all of the conversation turned to him. He really wanted to focus on the Reds. That's the kind of guy Hutch was. So when reporters would ask him, he would say, let's talk about the team. And he was excited about this team. And he had said in the paper, quote, as always, we're looking for any young players who can help us regardless of where they can play. That's what spring training's for. I'm hopeful we can bolster our attack. I think we can improve our speed and defense. If we can do this, it will help to make up for the loss of hitting. Now, what he's talking about is in 1963, there was a lot of things that went wrong for the Cincinnati Reds. And I'm going to read you here in a few minutes an article that Hutch actually wrote for the newspaper where he kind of summed up his idea of what he wanted to happen for the season of 64. So in 1962, the Reds scored 802 runs. But in 1963, they only scored 648. So that's a 154-run differential, a drop-off of just epic proportions. So I mean, it wasn't just a sharp drop in runs scored. It was extra base hits were down, home runs were down, and that was really the big surprise because the Reds were thought of as a power team. The Reds' home run production dipped from 167 in 1962 to only 122 in 1963. Altogether, they banged out 68 fewer extra base hits in 1963. So there was a dramatic drop-off in their offensive production. But the biggest hurdle Hutch was facing in spring training was who was going to be the starting third baseman. And he had mentioned some of the prospects like Chico Ruiz, Tony Perez, Bobby Klaus. Then he had veterans Charlie Neal and outfielder third baseman Tommy Harper. Said Hutch, we'll give them all a good shot. But I can tell you one thing. If Ruiz can prove to me he is ready to hit major league pitching, he'll be the regular third baseman. There's no question about his defensive ability, and he's fast. He stole 50 bases at San Diego last season. Now, as you'd expect, Hutch ran a tight ship at spring training, and he wanted to take advantage of every single second getting ready for the long season ahead. For instance, towards the end of spring training, when a rainstorm pounded the west coast of Florida, Hutch brought in buses and trekked 45 miles to Lakeland so they could train in an airplane hangar where they had 6 pitching machines set up. As opening day approached, Reds players wanted to make sure the press knew that they were dedicating the season to their leader, their general, Fred Hutchinson. Said pitcher Jim O'Toole. He's winning his personal fight. It's up to us to see that he wins the team fight as well. Winning the National League pennant would be a gift to Hutch. Hutch is the kind of guy you'd go out for all the time. You always want to win for a man like that. Now we're going to try even harder. Veda Pinson. The guys don't really talk about it. I've never seen them more determined than this spring. Sure, they want to win for themselves, but more so for Hutch. Frank Robinson said, Hutch's great fight against all odds makes us all better players and better men. It's bound to give us a little extra incentive. All of us feel like we're going to win the whole thing for him. Fred Hutchinson was asked to provide an outlook for the Cincinnati Reds in the local newspaper. And here's what he said. We've had a fine spring training, and the warm Florida climate helped our players round into fine physical condition. I feel we are ready physically to open the 1964 season. We had a number of disappointments in 1963 and some pleasant surprises. It seems the disappointments outnumbered the surprises. Joey J was 7-18, Bob Perky 6-10 for a total of 13-28. In 1962, Jay and Perky were 20-game winners, with 21-14 for Jay and 23-5 for Perky, for a total of 44-19. What a difference! Joe Nuxall was 15-8, Jim Maloney 23-7. And John Sator's 12-8, and they helped remarkably in keeping our club in contention. Injuries during the year had a lot to do with our club's fortunes. Frank Robinson was troubled at times, as was Gene Freese. Veda Pinson batted .313 and led us in almost all offensive categories. Pete Rose hit .273 and Tommy Harper .260. They did as well as could be expected in their freshman season. Leo Cardenas dropped from his .294 average, 10 homers and 60 runs batted in during 62 to .235 and 7 homers with 48 RBIs in 1963. Gordy Coleman hit .277 with 28 home runs and 86 RBIs in 1962. In 1963, it was .247 and 14 home runs with only 59 RBIs. Robbie went to bat 127 times less in 1963, which, figuring 4 times at bat per game, would mean he missed approximately 30 games due to injury. It is our feeling that if some of these fellows can rebound with their normal season, we will be considerably strengthened. We had some very impressive farmhands in spring training, and we hope some of these can help us during the season. One, Chico Ruiz will start at third base. There will be 6, 7 clubs in the thick of it for the pennant, and any one of them could win it. It takes a combination of everything to win a pennant, and I hope we can come up with one in 1964. I hope you can join me for episode 2 as we dive into the 1964 season, and it all starts on opening day 1964. And remember, you can listen to these on Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast, and the Queen City Historical Review page. Thank you for everyone that has subscribed. Your subscriptions mean a lot to me in the Queen City Historical Review newsletter. You get a little bit of baseball, a little bit of non-baseball, Cincinnati history articles, and it really helps me out with some of my passion projects. Believe me, those subscriptions are a huge deal. So thank you very much to all that subscribe. If you haven't already, you can listen to Team 99, which is a podcast, a deep dive into the 1999 Cincinnati Reds team, who came up just short, but it was a remarkable season and a much beloved team. So we're going to be heading into episode 2 shortly with that as well. I'm Cam Miller. Thanks for listening.